The descendants of Adam and Eve began to multiply and spread throughout the earth. However, men were corrupt and violent, just like Cain. God, witnessing the wickedness of men, regretted his decision. But there was a man known as Noah, who was fair and honest. Noah was walking the path of God. God then spoke to Noah and ordered him to build a large wooden ark. The great boat would have to be 135 meters long, 22 meters wide, and 13.5 meters tall. The ark would be split into different compartments and sealed with pitch. Then God told Noah that he would destroy all that existed on earth, and the creatures that live on it would also perish. God declared that he would summon a major flood, saving Noah and his family from it, forming an alliance with them. God ordered Noah to bring a couple of every living creature into the ark. The ark would also store food for the maintenance of the animals. Noah obeyed God's command. Therefore, 2 animals of every kind came to Noah and boarded his ark. The great flood promised by God began. 40 days and 40 nights of uninterrupted rain. The great ark floated on the waters, and even the great mountains submerged when confronted with such a massive torrent. All men and creatures who lived on earth perished. Only those in the ark survived. The waters covered the earth for 150 days straight. Only after that, the floodgates of heaven were closed, and the waters began to recede. Noah released a pigeon and a crow to see if they could find land, but they found nothing. Noah waited a few more days and released a dove, but this time the bird returned, carrying an olive branch in its beak, a sign that the earth was emerging again. The water would only return to its normal after a couple of days. Then God ordered Noah to abandon the ark and release all the animals that were inside it. And Noah did. The animals left the ark, and God made them fertile and multiply on the earth. Noah built a shrine dedicated to the Lord and offered a sacrifice to God. God was pleased with everything Noah had done and decided that he would never destroy again all the living creatures of the earth. Then God blessed Noah and his family, making them fertile, guaranteeing that they would multiply and populate the earth. God created the rainbow, the symbol of the pact between God and men. And from that day on, whenever Noah's descendants see a rainbow piercing the clouds, they recall the pact celebrated with God.
Sometimes you get different versions of the same thing, and you got to decide which is the right version, or which is the best version. I'll give you a couple different examples. I was not a Pepsi, but a Coca-Cola kid growing up. My grandfather, when I would go to visit him, he always had these bottles. He had like the bottles of Coca-Cola, and I'd get to drink my afternoon Coke while he drank his afternoon single malt whiskey. And in fact, I remember asking my grandfather once, like, Granddad, do you ever drink water? And he told me, no, water rusts the insides. Water rusts your stomach, he always says. And I believed him. So he had his whiskey, I had my Coke. All right. So then we fast forward to the mid-'80s a little bit. Coca-Cola put out this thing called New Coke. And it wasn't the same. It was this horrid abomination that was like cinnamon hot chocolate. It was just not good. So the second version of the same drink was caused me to be disenchanted with the whole Coke enterprise until 1999, when I spent a summer in Pakistan and I had the best bottle of Coca-Cola ever. Why is that? Because in the U.S. and the West in general, they had long since substituted sugar out for high fructose corn syrup as its sweetener. And so, but still in the East, in the eastern part of the world, they use pure sugar cane, or the way soda was intended, right? It was the right version of the same thing. I'll give you another example. It's the play, movie, musical Les Miserables, based on the 1862 novel by Victor Hugo. As a kid, I went to the play, saw the musical on stage, and I was struck during it with the theme of injustice and redemption and the context of the French Revolution. I thought it was really interesting. Then many of us saw the 2012 musical movie starring, unfortunately, Russell Crowe, singing this. This is what you had to endure.
This I swear by the stars.
Yikes. It was, not many people thought it was very good. Some liked it a lot. It was rough casting Russell Crowe as the police officer there. But the second version didn't seem quite right to me. But then I watched the non-musical film version starring Liam Neeson, Jeffrey Rush, Claire Danes, when they're not singing, and it starts to hit you that Victor Hugo never meant 19th century characters to be singing about police work, right? I mean, where did this come from? And indeed, it wasn't until the 1980s. The 1980s, well over a century later, someone thought it was a good idea to make Les Mis into a musical. It was never a musical. Someone in the 80s made it a musical, probably the guy who made New Coke. That's my guess, probably the same person. In other words, the third version was the best. The account of the biblical flood is a different version of the same event. As Francis Schaeffer put it, nearly every civilization, it's very interesting, if you look back at most civilizations, ancient Near East, Mayan, Native American civilization, they've circulated this myth or this story of an ancient flood. Especially so in ancient Mesopotamia. There are three accounts there in ancient Mesopotamia of what seemed to be the same catastrophic flood involving an ark that survived it all. There's the Akkadian myth called Atrahasis, in which in this myth, the high god and the god of weather destroy human beings because they're making too much noise and annoying them. True story, by the way. It reads very much, by the way, like the Grinch talking about Whoville, right? That they annoy him, they're beneath him, and so he shows his wrath towards them. It kind of reads like that. And in this story, the conclusion is the hero is a moody god, a capricious, moody, quick-tempered god whose flood story evokes timidity and submissiveness in his subjects. Then you have another version of that flood called the Epic of Gilgamesh. And that's a person who's 2/3 God, 1/3 man takes a journey to discover the secret of immortality. And on this journey, he finds this guy who's obtained immortality from the gods because he's the sole survivor of a catastrophic flood. And this guy, he managed to wisely build a boat and stick as many animals on board that boat as possible, and he survives it. He makes it out. The hero of Epic of Gilgamesh is this courageous man. There's a third version. The other Mesopotamian flood story that gets circulated is the biblical account of the flood here in Genesis. Now, some of us hear this account and we wonder if the biblical God is very similar to the God of the first version of the flood, this capricious, quick-tempered, moody God who is quick to show anger. And that is not at all what the account of the biblical flood tells us. Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, it's up here on the screen. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And if you read about this, you'll see reading a little more deeply, all the commentators will say this, that this verse directly mirrors Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, where we read, God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. God, in that account, was reflecting back on all this work of creation that he had done. He was reflecting back on it and said, oh, behold, it's very good. In Genesis chapter 6, God was reflecting on all the work humans had done. He saw it, he reflected, and behold, it was very evil continually. He wasn't being quick. He wasn't being capricious in his anger. God demonstrates a slow and reflective opposition to continual evil of humanity. It's a slow but just opposition to the continual evil of humanity. In fact, he's quite patient up to this point. He's just reflecting on all that has been done. Despite what children's books would tell you, as well as the 2014 film Noah, starring, you guessed it, Russell Crowe again. Here comes this guy. I'm convinced it's a conspiracy, but you tell me, I don't know. Noah is not the hero of this story, despite what children's books in the film tell you. Yes, he exercises faith and does what God says, and He gets a lot of publicity because of that, and you got to put somebody on that picture in the children's ministry wing. I get it. But notice, unlike the covenants that God makes with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob, God tells Noah of a covenant that has very little to do with him. It has to do with the entire earth. And we'll talk about that more next week because it's an important covenant involving a rainbow, and it's really interesting. We'll talk about that more next week. But it has little to do with Noah. And nearly every ancient civilization said there's this cataclysmic flood in its history, and you can choose which is the most plausible. I've given you 3 different versions. The biblical account of the flood, though, is about a just and patient God who's giving humanity a fresh start. That's what this account's about. It's about this just and patient God giving humanity a fresh start. Everything about Genesis 6 through 9 sounds like a creation story in reverse. God is decreating in chaos back to the beginning. And then after the flood, it's a new creation. In fact, in the New Testament book of John, chapter 3, Jesus picks up on this origin story of starting fresh, and he recasts it in terms of a second birth or a new birth. So if you're here this morning and you've lived your life assuming you've been the hero of your own story up to now, or even just the center of your own story up to now, but a flood has come into your life and you realize, dang, I am not the center. But you also may be reluctant to trust a God who just judge everyone quickly, cause suffering. If that's you this morning, you're exactly who this was written for. It was to contrast these 2 different accounts, and you also see the foolishness of either of these first 2 versions. That you see that I'm not the center, I'm not the hero of my story on the one hand, but I don't want to trust a God who's just quick to judge everybody's butt. You're exactly who this story is written for. God has given you an opportunity for a fresh start. So let's find out what that fresh start looks like and if it might be right for you. First, starting fresh requires divine grace. Starting fresh requires divine grace. So some of you are familiar with the Bible have heard that this story centers around Noah because Noah's the good guy. Noah lives a righteous and blameless life, and so this is how it goes, was what we might be told, and so God rewards him by sparing him and his family from the flood. All right, so Noah lives a righteous, blameless life. God rewards him, sparing from the flood. Then Noah makes sacrifices to God on the altar to thank him. And then God blesses Noah and his sons, and on we go. And this is how a lot of us think a relationship with God works. It's what Christopher Watkin calls an N-shaped relationship with God. I do something upward, right? Noah lives a righteous and blameless life. God blesses downward, spares me from the flood. I respond, God, here's some sacrifices. I'm going to worship, sing to you, talk to you, love you, praise you. God, you're going to bless me in return. You see the end, right, with that? Tit for tat. In fact, many of us operate this way in all relationships, not only with people, but even the things, the products of life. In fact, modern marketing, one book I was reading goes to great lengths to show this, how modern marketing operates according to the ways that really are just ancient magic. Think, for example, if you would, of some beautiful car or attractive smartphone or a resort or destination that kind of caught your eye when you saw its image. The way it's marketed is N-shaped. You give me yourself and your loyalty, I'll give you what you think you most want, even though it never satisfies. But I'll go back for it again, even though it gives back the law of diminishing returns. God must operate the same way, because I see that about religion. I see it here with Noah, you think. Noah first lives this righteous and blameless life for God, chapter 6, verse 9. Except that's not what happens. Chapter 6, verse 8 occurs first, where we're told Noah found favor, literally grace, in the eyes of the Lord. Look at that, chapter 6, verse 8. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That happens before the good life, before he lives this righteous life. And that's the scandalous news of the Bible right here, is that verse 8 comes before verse 9. That God first loves us. That he is the one he always initiates. Noah doesn't actively find grace, it's found grace. He found grace. Grace is God's one-way love activated through an undeserved gift. That's the definition. That God doesn't just say he loves us up in heaven, right? He doesn't just say it from the Bible, and in the Bible, and then he comes down from heaven and he makes his love active supremely in the person of Jesus Christ. And today he continually does it. He sends his Spirit from heaven to begin a work in different men and women who A, don't deserve it, and B, often aren't even looking for it. But he starts it in them. And that results in what Watkin calls a U-shaped relationship with God. God's love seeks us out from above, coming down from heaven. And then at the bottom of that U, right, the valley of that U, he gives us all the gifts and everything we need to respond to him in love. So all of it's love. When I first trusted my life to Jesus as a young man, I didn't know what I was looking for. I knew I was searching for something, but it certainly was not God. And he sent all these people into my life who loved me, even though I didn't know how to love them back. He also sent to me a message through 1 John 4 that this preacher guy shared. He says, everyone who loves, dear friends, let us love one another. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. But whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And I thought, well, shoot, all these people love without me loving in return. They must know God. I don't know how to love. I must not know God. I want that. I want that love, so I want God. Once I trusted my life to him, he then sent me gifts of knowledge and teaching to help me dive into the Bible and give me understanding of who God is and how to relate back to him. He also gave me early answers to prayer, especially after I immediately trusted him. He gave me a zeal to then share the good news about Jesus with others. He gave me a youth pastor who trained a handful of us how to share our faith. He gave me young life leaders who took a chance on me to minister to unchurched middle schoolers. In other words, God at the bottom of that U gave me all of these gifts to help me love him back. Does that make sense? So God not only loves us to save us, he gives us the gifts and supplies us with everything we need to love him back. It's all this fire hose of love to drink from the Lord. Just as he gave Noah the grace to live a righteous and blameless life. It's a one-way love. Well, Ryan, then how do I know that he's initiated that kind of love, that kind of grace towards me? How do I know that he has first reached down and is trying to get my attention about his love? Well, we see what he first does here in this passage, chapter 6, verse 6, so that we might know that he's trying to get our attention. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. This is the key to knowing God is initiating a work in your life. It's not simply feeling regretful as if you made a bad decision. It's a kind of hurt that you feel because you love deeply. Does that make sense? So like when the author says it grieved God, it grieved him to his heart, that's actually one word there. It comes from a Hebrew root word that's typically used to express the most intense form of human emotion that could be expressed in the Hebrew language. It was a mixture of rage and bitter anguish. It's that kind of combination. And think about it. If you're feeling both rage and bitter anguish, it's because you care about the person you're hurting or that you're offending, right? That not simply because you feel embarrassed because you got exposed or because you're experiencing the consequences of a bad decision and you just hate the consequences of what you should be experiencing. It's something more deep than that. It's something that you say, man, I'm not only sad that this has happened, I'm mad at myself for doing it because I care about this person. And if God experiences this, whose image each of us bear, we can experience it as well. So in summary, I first notice God's grace when I feel that kind of sorrow and regret in my life. So when I first noticed as a young person that I've been treating others with that N-shaped love, like that I bring something to the table, you might love me back. That all my relationships, or most of them, were based on each of us using the other person, using each other for attention, using each other for laughs, and that sort of thing. It was true, but I needed to look in the mirror and see for myself that, man, I'm treating people as a commodity. I'm treating people, my whole life, it's been a selfish love. And so I remember at the picnic table, overlooking the sunset in the foothills of North Carolina, saying, God, I've wasted my talents and the life you've given me. I have used my fellow man. I've lived only for me, and I am sorry. I could only feel that mixture of rage and anguish, bitter anguish, because I violated God and other people. I can only feel that because I cared about the other person, right? I cared about them. And that feeling of, wait, I care about God is a sign that he's first been caring for me through his divine grace. He's been reaching out to me. So the fact that you feel sad, the fact that you feel guilty, the fact that you feel anguish is a sign that God is working in your life and showing you grace and love. Starting fresh requires a second thing. It requires you doing exactly as God commands. Now, God gives Noah very specific instructions about how to build a ship that was the size of a modern-day shopping mall, essentially. You can imagine how detailed those instructions would have to be for this thing to work, right, to actually float. In chapter 6, verse 22, we're told Noah did this. He did all of these things. He fulfilled all of these instructions. He did all that God commanded him, we're told. From here through chapter 7, this phrase, Noah did all God commanded him, is repeated 4 times because Noah does exactly what God commands. That's one of the reasons Noah is a kind of role model for every kid who grows up, in kids ministry or Sunday school or whatever, and grows up in church. You see Noah do all these things. He does it completely, and he completes this kind of checklist for God. Fast forward to Jesus' time. If you were growing up in church or synagogue at that time, basically, only 5% of us would be able to read. And so everything we would learn about God, everything I would learn about God and relating to him would be through what the religious leaders stressed on a Saturday morning preaching at the synagogue. The main teachers of that synagogue would have been from this group called the Pharisees, who were practical to the nth degree. So, for example, they took one of God's commandments, like resting on the Sabbath day, and they developed 39 categories for work so that you would know how to rest and avoid working. That's 39 categories for one command. Because they really wanted to make sure you completed the checklist of do's and don'ts. And so that's what life was for you. You learn that relating to God is a checklist of do's and don'ts. I better do this, but I can't do this. I got to do this right. I can't do this. This is what I'm being taught about who God is and how I can please him. And in this moment, there's this moment in Jesus' ministry where these good-hearted people on the countryside of Galilee ask Jesus straight up, John chapter 6, verse 28, what must we do, Jesus? What must we do to be doing the works of God? You notice the emphasis there? What do we need to do to be doing the works of God? They're thinking about the checklist. They want to get to work on it just like Noah did it on his. And Jesus responds in a way that would shatter their entire categories about God. He says this is the work of God you got to do, to trust in the one whom he has sent. Wait a minute, what's next? What's part of it? Nope, that's it. To trust in the one he has sent. When you think about God, I know that some of you out there feel, I'll never be enough, and I can never do enough. And you feel the weight of that. And the secret is, that's an ideal position to be in, because Jesus is enough. It's okay that you feel that way at times, because then you can remember Jesus is enough. Jesus lived the perfect life of love that you and I couldn't live. And out of love, he died the death we deserve. So that when you trust Jesus and his perfect scorecard of right living and right loving, you will be accepted into the Father's kingdom. You get his scorecard, not yours. Trusting Jesus is all God commands for starting fresh. That's it. Just trust in Jesus, that he is God of the universe in your life. He's the one who can forever forgive the big no in your heart towards sin. If you trust him, that's all that's required for starting fresh. That's all he commands for starting fresh. That's exactly what Noah did. Noah's trust is what actually pleased God. Now, we're not told that in Genesis chapter 6, verse 6 through 9, but we are told that in Hebrews, New Testament book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 7. By trust, it's also from the same Greek word as faith, by trust, Noah constructed an ark for the saving of his household, and he's commended for that. Everything Noah does, all his obedience, is simply evidence of that trust. He shows each trust, but it's his trust simple trust that pleases God. The same goes for us. We show our trust by the way we live, by the way we love, by the way we care for others. But God requires that we just trust Jesus. And he loves and accepts us. Third thing here, starting fresh requires pain and patience. So I had a temper as a teenager. Katie was surprised by that, actually, later on. We did some marital counseling once, and someone who'd known us from my past said, hey, how do you deal with Ryan's temper? She'd only knew me when I was a teenager. And she's like, I've never seen him show any kind of anger in his life at all. But let me tell you the story behind that. First, as a teenager, I would break tennis rackets. Not a lot, maybe one or two. But I was known, I'd kick the occasional basketball. I once retaliated towards a classmate who tried to show me up. I took thumbtacks and I would nail them underneath and back through the bottom side of these plastic seats in every class that he would sit in, so that you couldn't quite see the thumbtack, but he would sit down in it every time. And it actually worked a couple times. You didn't know what was going on. I was pretty proud of my ingenuity. Not a great sign for me as a person, but anyway, but when God, through Jesus, gave me a fresh start, he also gave me a fresh heart. And he transformed my temper immediately. I don't know what, I didn't deserve it, but he did. However, I went back home and I still struggled with lust. I still looked at stuff I shouldn't look at. I still got into shenanigans with a lot of my friends that I shouldn't have been doing. And I was slow to change in other ways. When God starts fresh with Noah and his family, Noah had to wait not only 40 days, but the waters prevailed another 150 additionally. Then it seems like more time after that. So at least 190 days in the ark, maybe a full year. And Noah was 600 years old at this time. It had wait 600 years for this all to happen. Right? I mean, the back pain, the sciatica, the mashugana he went through. It was terrible. Well, fresh starts don't freshen everything immediately. That's the point. Walking with God requires patience. Some things transform fast. Other things compel us to rely on him for additional fresh starts, for like many fresh starts every day and every morning of our day. Fresh starts are also painful. I mean, think about blotted out from the earth is all the wickedness, but also all Noah's friends, his neighbors, his home, his land. I recall after trusting my life to Jesus, having to endure some relational pain, especially. I had to cut off some of my friendships because they were too toxic. They would cause me to stumble. They just weren't good for me anymore. Others cut themselves off from me because, hey, Jesus is in your life and you're starting to change. You're not as good a hang as you used to be. In the short term, guys, it was a really lonely and humbling time. But the short-term pain was worth the long-term love that I received from God. So the message in a nutshell this morning is this, that you can trust God to deliver you from your past and give you a fresh start. You can trust God to deliver you from your past and start fresh. And that is what God is saying to Noah here above all else. You can trust me to get out, to leave your past, to start fresh. We see it here in chapter 8, verses 15 through 19. God said to Noah, in verse 16, God said to Noah, go out from the ark. In verse 17, bring out. You're going to notice a theme here. Verse 18, so Noah went out. Verse 19, every beast, every creeping thing went out. Go out. Get out. You can leave your past behind as Noah did his. And you can trust starting fresh with a new life. We see that in these verses as well. Genesis 8:17, bring out with you every living thing that is with you, Noah, all flesh, birds and animals, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. Now, what does that sound like? Bring out the creeping things, swarm on the earth, be fruitful and multiply on the earth. What does that sound like? Genesis chapter 1, verses 28 through 30. Right? Creeping thing, all these things, go, be fruitful, multiply. Genesis 1 through 28, which is the first start of creation, with one addition. As Old Testament scholar Gordon Wenham points out, the original command to be fruitful and multiply is given to the fish and the birds. But here it's extended to all the land animals, which he says, Gordon Wenham says, is another hint of a new creation. So this fresh start is actually a little better, a little more full than even the first start. So with the animals, the only thing Noah actually brings out with him is a fresh start that's better than the first start. And that can be true for you today too, friends. A fresh start that's better than the first start. The New Testament is in Christ. He or she is a new creation. Behold, the old is gone. The new has come. Let's pray. Father, I think there are probably a number of us here this morning who are looking for a fresh start. And we thank you for this story, which is the origin story of fresh starts in the whole Bible. But it's the beginning of many to come that would culminate in knowing and trusting the person of Jesus Christ, who lived the perfect life we could not live on our own, perfect life of love, and dying the death we deserved, opened the door that we might have a fresh start for ourselves and a new beginning by a simple trust in him. I pray this morning that any here who feel that burden that, man, I'll never be enough, who have been crushed by their own flood of life, realizing, man, I am not the hero of my own story. I can't do this on my own. I pray that they would simply trust Jesus. I pray you might simply trust Jesus this morning, if that's you, and know that you have a fresh start in him. It's in Jesus' name we pray.